Heart of the Mountain Man, Chapter 4. Big Jim Slaughter pulled his Winchester from its saddle boot and waved it over his head at the sentry standing on a nearby ridge. It was the third such sentry he and his gang had passed in the last few miles as they approached their hideout known only as the hole in the wall. It was a natural valley high in the mountains, surrounding the small Wyoming town of Jackson Hole, accessible only by a narrow pass that meandered between several higher peaks. It had been a hiding place for men on the run for longer than anyone could remember. Easily defended, it had never simply been worth the trouble or the many dead men it would take to roust the criminals out of the place. Slaughter led a column of 20 men, all hard cases who were wanted by the law, across the country for everything from rape to armed robbery and murder. Riding next to him was an attractive woman in her late 30s. She had long brown hair tied loosely behind her neck with a small silk ribbon and was wearing a man's shirt and trousers. She rode her horse with practiced ease, as if she spent a lot of time on horseback. Her face was serene and composed, and she showed no trace of fear or trepidation, a fact that bothered Jim Slaughter. As they rode down a dry gulch cut out of the surrounding mountainside by hundreds of years of seasonal snowmelt runoffs, he glanced at her, his face showing his puzzlement. "Mrs. Carlson," he said, his voice neutral. "Excuse me, but all the way here from Colorado, you've acted like you went out for a ride in the park. Doesn't the fact that you've been kidnapped by a gang of men and taken from your home to a strange place bother you?" Mary Carson turned her calm eyes to Slaughter and gave a half smile. "Does it bother me? Yes. Do I fear you? No." Slaughter shook his head. He was beginning to admire this woman more and more. Monty Carson was a lucky man. "Why not?" he asked. He raped and killed and beaten hundreds of times before, and he never failed to see the haunted look that appeared in someone's eyes the moment they knew for certain they were going to die or be seriously injured. The acknowledgment of defeat and terrible sadness. It was a way he knew well, look he knew well, and he had come in some perverted way to look forward to it and enjoy installing it in others. Maybe because I know my husband will come for me even eventually." Slaughter snorted. "Even assuming he tries and assuming he is able to make it past the sentries and guards we have set up to discourage visitors, what makes you think you'll be alive when he gets here? How do you know I won't just turn you over to this?" He hesitated as he glanced at the scum riding with them, then back to her. "Pack of animals riding along with us?" She raised an eyebrow. "Are you trying to frighten me, Mr. Slaughter?" "No, just wondering why you seem so unconcerned about your fate." Mary looked away from him, her blue eyes taken in the mountains that surrounded them, the blue sky and the grass-covered slopes still layered with wild flowers and blooming shrubs. Finally she took a deep breath and spoke. "I've lived a good life, Mr. Slaughter. I was married to a fine man for 5 years, and when he was killed, I was lucky enough to find another wonderful man. Out here on the frontier, we learn to accept death as just another part of life, and not necessarily the worst part either. So if I die, if you kill me, then so be it. I've had more than my share of goodness, and I'll die knowing I've had more than you've ever had if you live to be 100 years old." Slaughter nodded. There was more than a little truth in what she said. He stared ahead down the trail without answering, thinking back on his life. It been a hard scrabble existence ever since he was a kid. After his mother died when he was no more than 5 or 6, his father dove into a whiskey bottle and lived there until he died at Jim's hands 10 years later. Daily beatings became a way of life for the young Slaughter until finally, one day when he was 16, he took the razor strap out of his father's hands, knocked the surprised man down, and beat him to death with an axe handle. Instead of burying him to hide his crime, young Jim threw his dad in a hog pen, figuring they had to eat too, just like worms or buzzards. When he saddled the plow horse and rode off to make his way in the world, he never looked back. "All right, Mrs. Carson, oh, you're right," he finally said. "I haven't got anything against you, so you have nothing to fear from me or my men. If your husband does what he's been told to do." Mary stared at him for a moment before asking in a low voice, as if she feared the answer more than anything Slaughter could do to her. "What about my husband, Mr. Slaughter? What business do you have with him?" Slaughter laughed, a sound many of his men who'd ridden with him for years had never heard. "Old business, Mr. Carson. A matter of some money he owed me for a long time." Mary's face showed her surprise. "Money? Why would Monty owe you money? I suspect there's lots of things about your husband you don't know, Mrs. Carson." He pursed his lips thinking, "Perhaps I'll let him explain them to you. If he's got the cold Johns to come after you like you think he does." Mary faced forward and put her heels to her horse's flanks, causing it to move forward so she wouldn't be riding next to Slaughter any longer. He shook his head, thinking how lucky Carson was to have such a woman and wondering if he knew it. Smoke glanced across the operating table at Doc Spaulding. "Doc, why don't you mosey on over to Lewis's place and have a steak on me?" Doc Spaulding looked up from where he was washing blood off his hands. He glanced at Smoke, then at the injured man on the table. "He just taken 2 bullets out of him. I take it you want to have a private word with this miscreant, Smoke, if you don't mind, sir." Doc sighed and threw the dirty towel in a basket next to the table. "Try not to make any more work for me today, all right? The man's lost a lot of blood and his heart won't stand much more. Reef, you got my word on it." Doc stared at Smoke, his eyes narrowing at the expression on his friend's face. He shook his head. It went against everything he'd ever believed in to leave the gunman with Smoke looking like that. But Mary Carson was a good and kind woman and a dear friend of everyone in town. If a little Judas's absence was what it took to get her back, then so be it. After Doc left the room, Pearlie and Cal lined up on the other side of the table, hands on hips, waiting to see what Smoke had in mind. Smoke reached down and slapped the man lightly across the face, causing his eyelids to flicker open. "What's your name, mister?" he asked. The man's eyes moved from Smoke to Cal and Pearlie, and his lips tightened into a white line. Evidently, he wasn't prepared to speak just yet. Smoke nodded to Pearlie, and they both took leather straps Doc used to tie down unruly patients on whom he was doing surgery, quickly fastened the man's hands to rails alongside the table. "Hey," he said, a look of fear entering his eyes. "What the hell do you think you're doing? I'm fixing to do a little surgery on you, partner, and I don't want your hands to get in the way, and I don't intend to use any of that chloroform the doc used either." Smoke inclined his head toward Cal. "Cal, shut that window over there, will you? I don't want any citizens to be scared by any hollering that might occur." "Sure, Smoke." "Smoke?" the man asked. "You're not the Smoke Jensen, are you?" "One and the same, partner." Now, Smoke said as he pulled his bowie knife from his scabbard on the back of his belt and held it up so the light from the lantern in the room sparkled off the blade. I'll ask you a question, and you'll answer. For every question you don't answer, I'm going to remove one of your fingers. After 10 times, if you're still reluctant to answer, I'll start on your toes. Comprende? The man shook his head. You can't do that, he cried, his voice trembling with terror. Smoke grabbed his right hand, bent all the fingers over except the index finger, and held the knife against it where the man could see. First question, what's your name? Blackie. Blackie Johnson. Who sent you the brave Sheriff Carson? I can't tell you that. He'd killed me. Smoke stroked the finger lightly with his knife, the razor sharp blade slicing through skin as easily as it were butter on a July afternoon. Wait, hold on! Blackie screamed. Last chance, Blackie, or they're going to start calling you Stubby. Smoke growled, his eyes glittering with hate. Slaughter. Ben Jim Slaughter sent us. Smoky, Blackie said, his voice hushed as if he was afraid to say the name out loud. What were your instructions? We were supposed to tell them to bring the money to Jackson Hole and Slaughter find them there and give him his money wife back. And where's Slaughter going to take Carson's wife? Blackie shook his head, flinging spare sweat off his forehead. Please, Mr. Jensen, don't ask me that. Slaughter skinned me alive if I found out I told you any of this. Smoke smiled, but there was no friendliness in his face. How's he gonna find out unless you tell him? Blackie licked his lips, his eyes staring at the blood oozing from his finger. He's gonna take her up to the hole in the wall. How many men does he have up there with him? Completely defeated now, Blackie made no more pretense of hesitation. He spoke in a low voice. Anywhere from 20 to 30, depending on the time of year and how many men are off spending the loot they've earned. Is there a way back in? Back way in? No, only one way in and one way out. And it's always guarded real men, real well. Jensen, if you're thinking of trying to get in there without Slaughter knowing it, you're crazier than he is. Smoke looked at Pearlie. Get this man a band-aid for his hand. He's gonna draw us a map of the area around the hole in the wall and Jackson Hole. Then we're going to keep him locked up here until we get back. Wait, what if you don't make it back? Blackie asked, sweat pulling up his face in the steady stream. Well, why then the good citizens of Black Big Rock will hang you by the neck until you're as dead as we are, Blackie. So you better put everything you can remember in that map. Like, comment, and subscribe on this video. Bye.